Thank you very much for all the papers and input so far in the consultation. It covers a lot of approaches and perspectives on freedom of religion. And thank you very much for allowing me, coming from a slightly different tradition than the Baptist, and even more, coming from Sweden, and working with multidisciplinary education in human rights. And you allow me still to give a paper here. This is not a paper I have prepared at home. This is something I have tried to put together during the consultation, listening and trying to pick up some issues. And I also picked up some images I will show on the screen here. Some of them I have used before in the KEK work, and some are new. And you know, when you are dealing with this during the time the consultation goes on, you are editing, you are deleting, you are moving around the passages, and I'm not really sure I will find everything on my computer, but I will do my best to orientate through all this. Let me take the same point of departure as our entire consultation, the heritage. It was good to be remembered of some of the Baptist fathers and how they have been in the forefront of issues related to freedom of religion or belief. Over the years, in country after country, it has been an issue for individuals as well as for denominations struggling from all of the right to exist, the right to register, the right to be an equal part in society. Since I'm coming from Sweden, I will add a small Swedish perspective with example from the Swedish fathers and mothers. Baptism in Sweden arrived relatively late, and until year 1860, it was by law required that every citizen in Sweden were obliged to be member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church. When the first Baptist arrived to Sweden, a Swede returning from US, he organized a small congregation in Sweden, but he was expelled from the country, not allowed to stay anymore, 1848. But 18 years later, after a lot of struggle, a lot of opinion building, where the Baptists joined hands with the Methodists, with Catholics, with priests from the Lutheran Church and other free thinkers, it was for the first time allowed to establish congregations beside the Church of Sweden. And it was also allowed to be a recognized denomination beside the Church of Sweden. In a small village in a remote part of Sweden, in Dalarna, in a village named Vomhus, if you say that name to Swedes, very few will know what it is about, since there are almost no houses left in that village. But at that time, the farmers in Vomhus, the only congregation in Sweden, Baptist congregation, in the entire Sweden, who applied for establishing a church. And they asked for the Swedish Free Church, 1865. And the interesting thing is that the petition to the king was signed by 31 male and 31 female members. Maybe it is done by accident, but the government told them, you are not allowed to establish the Swedish Free Church, but try with another name. So 3 years later, they applied to become the Vomhus Baptist Congregation. And then it was signed by 51 female and 51 male. And then you can see and understand it's not by accident. It was not a petition signed by the leader of the congregation, but it was a decision taken in a democratic way. And they wanted to show that the men and women are the same behind becoming a congregation. And this is very important in the Swedish heritage. And that's why I said the Baptist fathers and mothers. Because the struggle for democracy, I have heard voices maybe questioning or at least put remarks around democracy. But for the free churches in Sweden, democracy has been a very important issue. And they have been on the forefront when democracy was established in the country and when freedom of religion was part of it. So this is very important. And I would say that still this is important, that freedom of religion, the congregation, democracy, and the right of women goes hand in hand and has been characterizing somehow the Swedish movement and the Swedish free churches as such. But the challenge is, of course, what do we do with these issues? What do we do with democracy? I have heard this word a couple of times during our consultation, but with somehow a question mark behind it so far. But isn't democracy vital for our survival in the society? And we need to stress that. And we need to do it in every country. And isn't it that we can't take it for granted? Every generation needs to recover what democracy is about. And every generation has to recover what is freedom of religion about. We take it for granted often that the others know because we know. But I can ask my children, and they are not so familiar with democracy in relation to the church anymore. It's not a high priority anymore. And we need to ask us why, because this was essential for the founders, at least in my country. The next thing I want to stress here is a word I heard already in the beginning of the consultation, and it has been more and more accentuated, and that is the word minority. And we heard it in our round after our walk, that the issue about what do we do as minorities in relation to the majority. For sure, we are all being minorities in relation to majority. That's a fact. But religious minority, is that a word we prefer to use of ourselves? Religious minority. Are we thereby showing that we are something else than the rest of the society? Is that what we want to do? Is it just to relate us to the majority? Or are we by law required to be a minority? Of course, you can get protection by international law if you are a minority. But at the same time, what is the concept of minority doing with our identity? I will give you one example. Some years ago, I organized a conference in Cyprus, and I brought there Muslim and Christian scholars from Pakistan and Christian and Muslim scholars from some of the countries in the Middle East. And we should discuss these issues about minority, majority, and then, of course, in a Muslim majority setting. And we found out very soon that it was a huge difference in how to use the language. The people from Pakistan, they talked about themselves as minority. A minority suffering heavily in the situation, suffering from the blasphemy laws we heard about, for an example. And they said, we need to name ourselves as minority, since that gives us some kind of protection from the government. But we have found now, after naming ourselves minority for many years, that people around us looks upon us that we no longer belong here. We are something else than the surrounding society. But still we need to use minority. The people coming from the Middle East, they said, we will never use the word minority. We know that there are protection for minorities in the international law, but we will not use it, since we are part of the nations we are living in. That's our heritage. Especially the people from Egypt, they were very firm on this issue. And they just before had refused to host a conference about minority rights in Cairo because they refused to use the word from the Coptic Orthodox Church and from the evangelical churches. So this is for us really to figure out, how do we look upon ourselves as minority? Should we use that word? What will it make with my identity? Will I distance myself from the surrounding society? Will the surrounding society look upon me differently if I'm a minority or if I'm part of the society? And that's one of these issues I want to raise with you here. Now to another, we go to the next, please. I guess you have seen this. Some of you may have done it. I don't know. No. This is a survey coming from World Value Survey. They are doing questionnaires in about 70 countries around the world with issues about values, about morale, and so on. And then they have an axis with secular rational values going up and self-expression values on the bottom line. And then they place in every country in the survey in this figure. And you will find at the bottom here some of the countries in Africa, some of the Muslim countries, which are very traditional values and at the same time survival values. Keep the family, keep the tribe, and so on. And at the top, with the secular rational values in combination with self-expression values, you will find one country far, far up in the corner in the yellow. That's Sweden. And then you say, oh, that's what we always have thought about these Baptists from Sweden. They are far away, almost dropping out of the picture, right, up there. But here we need to understand, and this is a challenge for us, do we understand our position in such a pattern? Because I think that the surrounding society is also influencing how we as churches are taking stands. We are somehow following each other in a high degree. And that will mean that maybe the churches in Sweden, they have quite a lot of self-expression values and secular rational values in the neighborhood of the churches. Let me put it like that. You have a lot of individualism in our setting. And some will say, okay, what is then the common base? Is there anything common then? Everyone think what they want. But at the same time, in the traditional Swedish society, as well as in the churches, that's where the human rights agenda has grown as a common moral value. And I would say through the education in school system, the education with civil servants, and with the education in the churches, it is a common ground for a lot of people, the human rights value. And then we suddenly can see that the division is maybe not necessarily between Baptists and Orthodox, not necessarily between Muslims and Lutherans, because they find a kind of common value. I would say that one of my Orthodox friends, he is from now on also teacher at Stockholm School of Theology, the school run by the former Baptists and the New Uniting Church now. And we have very same relation to the human rights issue. He's Orthodox, I am Protestant. I have much more problems with people in my own congregation who still has no idea what human rights is about. It's just a concept, but they don't know what the content is. And I think this is important for us to look upon. You may find friends where you do not expect it. You may find friends where you do not expect it. This walk we have done today, this is not that you find a friend after sitting 20 minutes listening or discussing. I have been the chairperson for the Muslim Christian Jewish dialogue in Sweden for about 7 years. It's now 10 years ago when I stopped that. But in that it took year after year, meeting every month, sitting the same persons in the same room, discussing what is God, what is prayer, and after a while, what is freedom of religion, what are our problems. And after that, you get friends where you do not expect it. I can, anytime I want, call a couple of the Muslim leaders in Sweden, and we can go out for dinner. They will answer my questions. They will give me a room central in Stockholm if I want to have a room just to have a business meeting, because it's very efficient place to do that. But it takes time. But you may find friends where you do not expect it. So up there is Sweden. And then I will say that we have a common view on human rights, basically. But there is one exception, and that is the big challenge. The exception is freedom of religion. Even if I take my students in the class, in the class Christer mentioned, for example, about freedom of religion, you will, in an ordinary classroom for 30 people, you will find maybe between 10 and 20% Muslims. You will find Orthodox Christian. You will find a leader from the Hare Krishna movement, and so on. And then you have some secular people, you have some Baptists, whatever, I mean, in that class. And even in that class, they will do the same as we did this morning when we raised the issue, how to interpret now the freedom of religion. And we start discussing with each other. How is it with the clothes? What can we say? How big can the cross be and not? And it ends always up in a huge discussion. With other human rights, people agree very much. This is the system we are going into, but not when it comes to freedom of religion. We take the next picture, please. Hello, next picture, thank you. And that goes, how can we be dressed? What about slaughter, which is prohibited according to halal and kosher in Sweden? What about the church bell? Are they violating my human rights in the morning or not? That's a question. What about circumcision of the boys, which is not easily allowed in Sweden anymore, and so on? And you get question and question about this. And you have the hard secularism we heard about this morning. We have the state religion we heard about the morning. Ideas about that. We have voices claiming religion is poisoning everything. We have voices denying any importance of religion. And when that goes on in the society, it's up to the individual to decide, what do I think about these freedom of religion issues? And arguing is going on in the media. It's huge debate about freedom of religion. And there are more and more people questioning freedom of religion. Is it really necessary? Isn't it covered by freedom of association? Isn't it covered with freedom of expression? and so on. So this is really a challenge for us in Sweden, but I think this goes in different levels for a lot of countries. And can we speak, or I would put it this way also, can we speak at all about freedom of religion without speaking of human rights as a whole? Since if people question just freedom of religion, then there is a risk it will be out. There has been gallops in the European Union, and the majority of the Swedes and the majority of, I think it was the Germans, they would say that we can get rid of freedom of religion. It's not necessary anymore. Or is it the other ways around? If we speak about the human rights, then we can't exclude freedom of religion. And that's a challenge for me, how to handle this. And in the lecture this morning on Christianity and secularism, Dr. Nigel gave us civic secularism, or a soft secularism, as representing the most realistic future in a situation where societies are more likely to be plural, a situation giving the church a position of participating without possessing, and all this for a tolerant and free society, if I got it right. Yeah, and I will try to reflect a little bit more about freedom of religion as this meeting point in civic secularism, and ask in relation to human rights about this arena. And of course, that is a huge issue when we say that for a Baptist, freedom of religion is in the DNA. It's so rooted. But is it the same easy to say human rights are in the DNA for a Baptist? And what will happen when the society looks differently upon these issues? So this is how I think, what I think is happening just in the surrounding society, more or less. I will just take a very, very brief thing about what I think is happening also in relation to the universal level, the European level, and each state. And I've discussed this in some other instances also, but I think it's important for us to know. We take the next, please. I mean, you know the Universal Declaration, you know the Convention, which is very broadly talking about freedom of religion, freedom to manifest religion, worship, observance, practice, teaching. And then we have the General Command, you take the next also, number 22, which on the universal level gives a lot of freedom for worshippers in relation to religion. The display of symbols, that is what UN tells us that should be there. The observance of dietary regulations, the wearing of distinct clothing and head coverings, just to take a few examples. Of course, we know that the UN has a lack of implementation, no mechanism of following up and so on. But still, the intention is on that level. And for me, that is giving a huge freedom of religion to the individual, whatever religion you belong to. But what happens in Europe? We have the guidelines we saw yesterday, which are telling in the same way, we take the next please, the same way of the protection of freedom of religion belief. And we know that Keck has worked a lot with this, and it's a very good text, the best we have so far in this way. And still, it is mainly on the external affairs. I mean, it's for when the European Union go outside the European Union to talk about the rest of the world. And of course, it's at the same time expected that we somehow should follow it in our country. And it is the same when we go with what we heard yesterday about the proposal coming up from the Parliamentary Assembly at the Council of Europe, the resolution we listened to yesterday. But the state can, in principle, use it if they want. But what happens then in Europe? And I will just give a few short, I take the next picture, please. You have the European Convention on Human Rights, you know that, and we take the next one, please. And we have these mechanisms. We heard a lot about it, here about the European Court. We have discussed some of the statements coming from there. But I want to point on this margin of appreciation, which for me is somehow a crucial issue in this, since that gives the European Court of Human Rights somehow a way of escaping from some of the decisions about freedom of religion and saying the country has a margin of appreciation, and they give it back to the country to decide. And that is a way which we are seeing more and more and more of, according to my mind. Maybe there is a difference going on in some of the issues as we heard in the morning here, but so far it has been this. And what is happening when you give it back to each country? Then we are in the situation that every country decides themselves. And there is no European way really to look at some of these issues, not to tell about the universal way. And the same goes for the, we can take the next one, and the next one, please. When I read the Constitution of Europe, the one we rejected, you know, and then we got the Lisbon Treaty later on. If you read about religion in this, that's also interesting, and it's a signal to each country and to each member. Then we talk about the European Union. The Constitution, they had the same broad aspect of freedom of religion. But the Lisbon Treaty, that says, down there, the Union respects and does not prejudice the status under national law of churches and religious associations or communities in the member states. EU is telling it's up to the member state to decide. It's not for the European Union. And what is happening? Then we get all these different Moldova, Montenegro, and whatever since they give the right. They don't say about it, at least they do that signal. We take the next one. And it's the same with the article talking about cultural, religious, and linguistic diversity. In the Constitution, it was, the Union shall respect cultural, religious, and linguistic diversity. That we said no to. And instead, we got the Lisbon. The Union shall contribute to the flowering of the cultures of the member states while respecting the national and regional diversity. So it's, once again, each country can decide upon themselves. And if there is anything we should do, we should be a little bit afraid of this development. And I will say it like this. If you combine that, it's open for discussion among the people, freedom of religion or not. And then the European Union and the European Court may be giving back to each state. Is that the big challenge for us? Is there any way to re-establish a kind of universality, which make each country to follow some basic rules at least? So we do not have to write and do a lot of work like in Montenegro. And it will come in other countries and other countries. And of course, what will happen in the next step? This, you coming from Great Britain knows more about it, but Britain and the present government's aspirations of repealing the Human Rights Act, withdraw from the human rights as it is, and establish a human rights agenda of themselves. What is happening if one country is doing that? And what will follow when other countries, if Great Britain can do it, of course we can do it, and we can do it. And what will then happen with freedom of religion as a universal, respected human right? So I look upon these as quite important issues for us. And for me, it's important in this setting then to show that human rights are universals, can't be divided, like cutting out freedom of religion. The best protection for freedom of religion is to keep the entire human rights agenda as it is today. Sometimes I used to just take some Bible quotation. I will do it very fast here. You go on to the next. The Good Samaritan. I mean, I grew up with the Sunday school that we should help, we should be merciful, and so on. We should help the people in need. And of course, we should do that. Elevate suffering, help the victim. One of the patterns of being merciful, being good, giving a helping hand, or so on. But the story continues. Afterwards, the man takes the victim to the inn to give him protection. That's the next step, to give protection. And for me, when I read this text, there is a third step in it. And that is when they say, whatever it costs, I will pay for it. Restore this person completely. Bring him back to his full dignity. Usually we leave that out, whatever it costs. We are prepared to do it. Isn't that what human rights are about? Bring back the dignity. Okay. We have been on this walking tour today, and I found it very interesting. And a lot of groups we have met and so on. And during our consultation, we have also been talking about sometimes that there is also a world outside Europe. We have mentioned in prayer Central Asia. We have mentioned, also heard about some of the situations going on under ISIS and so on. And I think this is important for us as Christians to consider our own society, consider our own country, entire Europe, but also have a view and include what is happening in relation to freedom of religion outside or our Baptist settings, outside our own settings. So I will just refer briefly to the Pew Institute, and I'm sure you have seen this. Now it's a little bit small maybe for you here. That's the Pew Institute in US, which are registering trends in religious restrictions and hostilities going on in the world. I'm sure we can question some of the numbers and so on, but that's not the intention here. It's just to showing one important trend going on here. And that is that they summarize that roughly a quarter of the world's countries are still grappling with high levels of religious hostilities within its borders. And it is growing. And then it's interesting for us to see that the Christians have problems in 102 countries. The Muslims have problems in 99 countries. The Jews have it in 77 countries. So it's almost equal problems for Muslims and Christians. How do we deal with that in this society we are living in? And they do divide it into two different, we take the next picture, please. Yeah, please. They do divide it into government restrictions of religions. That is growing, and it is in 27% of the countries, covering 63% of the world populations. There are still severe restrictions by the government of religion. And we take the next picture, please. And hostilities involving religion is even higher. 33% of the world population are living in countries with a high level. And we take the next one, please. And if we see on these countries and look upon it, of course, there are countries that we assume should be there for governmental restriction: China, Indonesia, Uzbekistan, Iran, Egypt, Afghanistan, and so on. Malaysia. With all the discussion today in Malaysia, if the Christians are allowed to use the word Allah or not. In the Malay language, they have Allah for God. And now the Muslims have said, you are not allowed to use that word anymore. That's a Muslim word. And what happens then? The library say, we need to throw away all our books in the library since they name God as Allah. We can't use the hymn book anymore. We can't use the Bible anymore. Is this a fair way of doing it or not? And this discussion goes on. And countries with social hostilities involving religion is topped by Israel, followed by, I mean, it is all this with the price tag going on from the extremist Jewish groups and so on, which is an important part of that. India, Pakistan, and so on. And of course, this is a challenge for us when we talk about freedom of religion. We need to, of course, look into the Baptist setting, but we need also to go outside. There is things going on around us which are very severe, and how do we react on that? I will take one more thing here. I see that the time is running. Then I go back again in the heritage of the Uniting Church in Sweden. Exactly 100 years ago, there were missionaries in cities in Armenia, cities in Georgia, cities in Azerbaijan, coming from Sweden. They did missionary work, they established congregations, they established a kind of denomination in the area. But 100 years ago, they became part of an intense refugee work, taking care of some of the survivors coming from the Armenian Genocide, escaping the massacres in the Ottoman Empire. What we call today the Armenian Genocide, or if you are Syrian, you will say the Seyfo phenomenon. And Sweden followed up the following years, establishing settlements in the Khabur Valley in Syria, 3 or 4 villages enabling for Armenians who survived to establish a new life. And the Khabur Valley, that is now exactly the area where the ISIS is governing. And then the question is, of course, we should not take all, and I'm quite sure you understand that for me, that Islam, Muslims, is a variety of groups, exactly as Christians are a variety of groups. But there is also these groups which are really dangerous at the moment being, and that is, among others, the IS or ISIS. Is there a new genocide going on? We don't know. It needs to be intentionally. It needs to be planned and systematic in order to be a genocide. Or is it crime against humanity? Or is it war crimes from different sides going on? And of course, this is very important for us when we, during the consultation, has been mentioning the refugees. All the time, more or less, in every session, you have been mentioning the refugees. And it is not a European refugee crisis. It's a disaster for the countries involved and for the people living in these countries. That's very important to say. And when you are sitting in a boat in the Mediterranean, hoping to go all the way to the other shore, it doesn't matter if you are Christian Orthodox from Eritrea, if you are a Protestant from Sudan, if you are a Sunni from Syria, if you are a Shia, and so on. It doesn't matter. You are just a human being sitting in the boat, trying to escape hell, more or less. And of course, that is an issue for us all. We are all aware of that, for sure. And I will just tell you that even as far as up in the north in Sweden, we are seeing the refugee situation. Since a lot of the refugees, they want to go to Sweden, or they use Sweden as a transit country going even further on. Every day, we get 1,000 persons entering Sweden now. In the middle of Stockholm is my home congregation, and they have agreed now, together with the mosque, we need to help in this situation. So the central mosque, they will take about 100 refugees each night and cover them. And my church will take between 75 to 100 refugees each night to give them food, a place to sleep, new clothes. You will give toys to the children. You will give medical health. And there will be lawyers giving legal advice for this. And the next morning, they will move on to the next place. And this is happening 3 or 4 days a week. My church can manage, the church is down there, can manage, but not more. This is, I mean, in the Uniting Church in Sweden, a rather big church, so to say. It's about between 1,400, 1,500 members in the church. And for many, many years, the church has been working on a kind of international level. So they have members from, I think it was the last time they counted, from 52 different countries. A lot of them coming as refugees from the beginning and so on. And there is service in English, in Korean, and in Swedish every Sunday with, I guess, 700-800 persons coming to church every Sunday. And now they have this refugee work. And of course, that's a small, small contribution. And I told Christer the story, and I will try to tell it for you also what happened yesterday. My wife is the senior pastor in the church, so I get some information now and then what's happening in relation to this refugee work. This church has also been a kind of center for some of the Roma people in the neighborhood. And in Sweden, you may know that there are Roma people from Bulgaria, there are Roma people from Romania begging in the streets. And the church is open every day, so they can go in there, they have a special place, they can sit, they can get some food, they can rest, and they then go out in the street again. And sometimes we find something for them to do and so on. And of course, one of the questions was, how will the Roma people now, which find the church is their church, react when we take the refugees coming in, taking over the church, occupying all the showers, whatever in the church? And then my wife sent an SMS yesterday evening, and she told that today the Roma people came to her with all the money they got. And they said, this is for the refugees. I'm sorry, but since I know these people, it's rather moving for me that these people sitting in the street did that. And yeah, that's the situation. And sorry, I usually avoid to try to, but I know these people and it's a little bit moving for me. The day the church decided to do this, it may be by chance, but we have a Bible quotation for the day, every day, which randomly shows up at the homepage of the church. And the same day, some weeks ago, they took the decision to open up for the refugees. This next picture, this quotation showed up. That when an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the aliens as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord of God. That showed up on the Facebook the same day as they decided we will receive the refugees. And they say, it's randomly by the computer, or is it the hand of God or the Holy Spirit behind the computer? So I mean, this is in one way a way of seeing that these people running now, we don't know what will happen in Bulgaria. We don't know that at the moment, being after these statements and so on. But going from country to country, going to the West, going to Sweden, and we need to try to do our best to somehow give them a space in this. Now I will give you one more Bible quotation rapidly, which is my favorite Bible, and Elisabetta has seen it before, and maybe some other of you also. Sometimes I like to read in a special way some of the texts, especially some of the parables, and I start reading it from the top and from the bottom of the text. And this is about the Good Shepherd, when the tax collectors and sinners came to Jesus and he was accused of dining with them. And then the first verse talks about 1.99, and the last talks about 1.99. And every sermon I've heard has been talking about this, the one who repent and so on. But if I take the next verse in both ends, please, the next one, it is, go after the one who was lost until you found it. And if you go back, you will find the same. I have found it, it was lost. And it's not by accident. This must be a pattern by Jesus or by the one who, by Luke or whatever, I mean. It seems to be a model somehow. If you go one more, he lays it upon his shoulders and rejoice. And if I go from the back of the text, rejoice with me. So it seems to be a pattern. And then, according to my way of reading, and I'm not alone of reading these ways, of course, there are ways of doing it. Then in the central part of the text is the message. And this is a way, when you don't have a written text, you just go and then you repeat it back. That's the idea with it, right? And then we have the central part left. And please, and when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors. Is that the central text in this? I mean, that's why Jesus is eating with these people who no other would be together with, the tax collectors, the sinners. That is, he calls together his friends and neighbors. That's what we are doing. That's what we are doing. And then we take the next picture. Since Jesus repeats everything once more, and then it's the woman with the lost coin. And you will find it. And in the middle, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, calling friends and neighbors. And of course, in my perspective, it's also interesting to see that it is a he who does it in the first parable. It is a she who does it in the second parable. She calls together, he calls together. Is that part of the message? Sorry, I've taken 5 minutes too long, but I will stop here. Thank you.